Hi everyone, I'm Ankita from NASSCOM. Today's topic is like a brewing topic, an intriguing one, crossing the Indian IT chasm from services to product. And again, I have Kaustubh Patikar with me. Kaustubh is the founder of Nitrous Oxide Consulting and is a volunteer in the Skill Dev pillar and the Deep Tech Club of the Product Council. And the session's flow will be, Costa will be taking us through few of the slides, and in the middle, he'll ask for some of the questions. We'll take maybe 2 to 3 questions, followed by again his presentation, and again followed by the Q&A. And you can ask questions anytime during the session. And also, please do not forget to leave your feedback to help me better my future sessions. Welcome, Costa, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ankita. Thank you all for joining. I'm excited to be here. So I think, like Ankita said, this topic has been brewing for a while, and I picked this because over the last several months, maybe a year or so, of course, I have worked with companies who are trying to do this, and also often I get questions from people I meet on LinkedIn and so on. So I thought I'll share my perspective on this. So again, thank you for joining, and we will jump right in. Just pause on the disclaimer for a second and just spend a minute here on the intro. So, I've had the opportunity to work on building and scaling products for nearly 20 plus years. Most of that in the US, and then last 5-6 years here in India. And it's of course a favorite topic of mine. It's what I've devoted most of my career to, is about building and scaling products, both with large companies as well as startups, and certainly something I enjoy thoroughly. And that's also what I do in my consulting business, working with product companies who want to build and scale better. And also a subset of that is IT services companies who are looking to build products. So a lot of the points that I will be sharing, I think a bulk of that comes from my own experience in working, when things went well, when things did not go so well. And I hope to share all these observations with you, and hopefully you find them useful. Thank you. Okay, so let me first talk about why is this a chasm, right? So chasm is a a huge gap. It's pretty deep. Can be dangerous crossing it if you don't know how to. But really, the idea itself actually comes from one of my favorite books called Crossing the Chasm, which is one of the earlier works by Geoffrey Moore. Not to be confused with Gordon Moore of Intel, but he's one of the early authors who talked about how companies that build new products, startups, actually find their early customers, right? So he talked about that, like how do you go from one customer, the first 5 customers, and then eventually to a large group. So I find that the whole journey of building products in India is very similar, right? That we have now a lot of success in IT services and a nascent setup in IT products, but there is a gap. And there are several companies who have attempted it, some with success, some with failure, others with mixed success. So that is where I think a lot of this discussion comes in, which is, what does it take to go as a company, as a country, from being an IT services business expert to being a product expert. And I come from an engineering background, so the way I think about it is that you are on sort of one mountain, right, or one height, and you want to cross over to the other, and there's a huge gap in between. Now, the way you have to do it is, of course, you can't just jump over it, right? I think it'll be too far, and you'll likely fall. But you think of it as building a bridge, right? That means you need to have a systematic plan to go from one end to the other. And in order to build a bridge, of course, you need to have the skills. You need to have the skills to build a bridge. You need the know-how, what kind of bridge to build, what kind of material to do, what kind of experts you need, what kind of people you should hire, all of that. And then, you have to try it, of course, before you can actually bridge that gap. So that's the reason sort of for picking the title and the thought process. So hopefully that makes sense. And with that, I will, sort of jump into the presentation and start talking a little bit about, the sort of world we are living in a little bit, and why this topic is relevant, why it makes sense to talk about building products and not just services. So, in a way, the world was already changing. So you had the so-called flattening of the earth. A lot of people, companies, businesses are using new technology, and everybody's looking to do things faster. In a way, the COVID crisis actually, made it even faster. I mean, it was already fast, and now it's faster, which means most of the businesses and industries around the world went through a severe change cycle, and they're of course still going through. A lot of them had issues around simply business continuity, right? I can't keep my doors open. And of course, physical businesses were all over the world mostly shut or, are operating under minimal capacity, which meant that a lot of them needed to operate through technological means, right? Operate digitally. But most of them were not prepared for it. Most of their systems could not handle the kind of load. Right? And I'm sure any of you tried to do e-commerce or order during the lockdown would have faced severe difficulties during that process. A lot of cancelled orders, a lot of website down. Even for many, even your broadband at home was probably not working very smoothly. I know mine wasn't. And then, so that just brought to the fore the idea that all of these industries, all of these businesses actually need to start looking at first reviving their business, right? So wherever you are seeing a disruption in business, a slowdown, they need to find ways to revive it. And where they are able to get going, they need to start going a lot faster. And for many businesses, the organized businesses, one key way in which they can achieve this revival and acceleration is going to be through the use of technology. Because technology is one way in which new systems and solutions can be enabled. So for instance, most of us who have been working from home, we are able to work from home because of broadband, because of the ability to have some kind of video conference, because of our ability to have some kind of screen sharing, document sharing, and in general be able to collaborate and work together without actually being physically in front of each other. And all of that, if you think about it, is actually enabled through technology solutions. Now, that's the sort of simple part, which is on a personal level, how do people work from home? But now try to extend that logic to how do businesses operate, right? A lot of businesses actually depend on face-to-face interactions. A lot of businesses actually, that's the only way they serve their customers, right? So most of these businesses are severely affected. And if they don't find new ways to serve their customers, in all likelihood, they will face decline and maybe even the danger of completely shutting off, right? As you are seeing, of course, in some industries. And what that has meant is for most businesses, they can't really operate the way they were, right? So for a lot of businesses, especially the mid to large companies all over the world, digital transformation had become a buzzword, right? I mean, both for people who are selling solutions as well as those who are buying solutions. But in a way, this crisis has solidified that, right? That means now it's no longer just a buzzword. It's actually a new way of operating, a new way of doing business. And this is no longer a nice to have, right? If most businesses need to survive, want to grow, they must find a way to actually operate their business, at least some portion of it, in a digital manner. And that means then underlying systems, underlying modes of interaction, all need to be supported digitally. And in a way, digital transformation has become key to arriving at this. So if you think about this, that the world was already changing, and now it got faster. What has that meant for a lot of the IT services business? So actually, before we jump into this, Ankit, could you please bring up survey question 1?
Yeah, sure. So I'm launching the first question. Here you go. It is about, tell us about your company business. I'll close the survey in next 7 minutes. 7 seconds, sorry. So, Kostub, the result is 53% says products and related services, 22% pure play services, 24% combination.
Okay, so we have about half and half. Half of them are products and related services, and the other are either pure play services or a combination. So I think that's quite useful. So some of the slides or topic points are going to be a little bit from the perspective of the services side, but of course, as we move later into the conversation, it'll be more about the product. So one of the things that's happening, whether you are services or products for that matter, is customers and businesses want to deploy their systems faster. Right? That means if you are an IT services company, there is pressure on you to build faster, to have some pre-built stuff in a way derived so that customers can derive value a lot quicker. If you are a product company, that means your products need to be easy to deploy, easy to onboard, easy to maintain, manage, etc. And because anybody on this earth can compete with anybody else, this means it's become even more competitive to defend your business, right? One advantage of all the digitalization is that now you can compete for business anywhere in the world. You don't necessarily actually have to have physical presence there, but that also means on the flip side, you are competing with everybody else. So of course, we have seen some early changes over the last 3 to 4 years in some of the large IT companies in India. Right? And when I say large IT companies, I'm referring to the services companies, the likes of Wipro, Infosys, Cognizant, and Tech Mahindra, and several of the others below them. And then you've seen similar trends from companies like PwC and Accenture, is that they have actually invested in IP building. Either they have, in some cases like Infosys, created completely independent arms or subsidiaries. And in other cases, it's of course part of the parent company and not an independent business, but in terms of the way they are selling services and the way they are offering solutions, products and platforms have become a part of it. And certainly this has given them an edge. I think TCS at some stage has reported that nearly $1 billion come from products and platforms or services enabled by products and platforms. So that's a huge number from a services perspective. One other change, which of course has been brewing for a while, is the way customers are looking at it. Right? While maybe over the last 10-15 years, they were very comfortable actually getting billed on a time and materials basis. The larger the contract and the longer term the contract, customers are actually looking for different business models. Sometimes they are insisting on minimum outcomes. Sometimes they're insisting on sort of fixed costs. Sometimes they are coming up with more creative ways to actually organize the contract, so that it's not always simply about how many people are working on the contract and what is their billing rate. So they're looking for different business models. So when you consider all these things, you realize that hey, there could be potentially a challenge with simply operating as is, right? So what was working maybe over the last 10 years may not as easily and automatically work over the next 10 years. Now, if we sort of look at the heart of the Indian IT business in India, of course, bulk of it is the services business, right? I think, depending on various estimates from, economists and analysts like Gartner and IDC, the Indian IT services business has topped $180 billion. Right? So that's a huge number. And it's at the top of the list. Right? So I think it's only second to the US in terms of overall IT services business. And it's, of course, probably the top exporter in the world when it comes to IT services. That means IT services companies based in India actually export most of their services all over. And of course, we talked about some of the big names in that business. But when you compare that to the products business, it's a fraction of it. Right? The IT products business, that means companies who are based in India and selling some kind of IT, some kind of software product, or in general software and technology related products, actually make only less than $10 billion. And what is interesting is that half of that is actually local demand. That means close to 5 billion of that under 10 billion is actually products being sold to customers in India. And the rest is exported. So in a way, only $5 billion of software products get exported, while services are exported almost close to 180 billion or higher. And of course, there are a few successes in the last few years. Companies like Freshworks have come up. There are several others in sort of vertical software as a service solution, and new product companies are coming up all the time. And of course, you have companies in the automation space. Several of them with strong presence in India. They've also become very successful. But if you look at the size and scale, the product business is still quite small in India, and that means there is a huge opportunity. There is an opportunity to grow, there is an opportunity to build products, and there is an opportunity to bring it to scale, in all likelihood to the same level as the services, if not bigger. So before I jump into the next slide, Ankita, could you please bring up a survey question too?
Sure, Costa. Yeah. What is the size of your business? So the answer is 45% says under $5 million. The next is 17%, $5 to $10 million. Then the next answer is 12%. And the last is 26%, $50 million.
Okay. So I think definitely in this audience, we have bulk of the people from small to mid-sized companies, and about 1/4, 25, 26% from large businesses. Right? Essentially, anybody making more than $50 million in their business. So that's useful because as we go through the next set of slides and discussion, it'll be important to sort of carve out and talk about ways in which a small company or a mid-sized company approaches this versus a large-sized company. So, one of the key challenges to actually starting to build product and making it successful is the approach, right? So the way I think about it is that there is actually a mindset challenge. So it's not a skill challenge. I think there are a lot of people who are available in India who are highly trained engineers. They know how to write good software, but there is a mindset issue. So in a way, a lot of companies, a lot of people struggle with the idea that if we can build services, why can't we build product? Right? I mean, what's so different about building product? Why is it that that size is under 10 billion while services is 180? Why is that the case? Or many companies have even attempted to build products and have not had the kind of success they expected. What gives? Why did that happen? Right? So what I have seen based on my experience, as well as having conversations, and having worked both with products companies and services companies, um, I find there is a distinct difference in the approach, in the mindset, in the way in which the problems should be looked at, the way in which you start building, the way in which you start building your product, the way in which you start building your business. And that's why the way I look at it is that it's a mindset challenge. That means, there is distinctly a product mindset, there is a services mindset, and of course there is common ground, but there are a lot of key differences in which how this should be approached. So I'll spend the next few minutes talking about that, and then maybe we'll take a few questions before jumping into the end of the presentation. So the sort of first difference lies in what comes first. Right? Now, if you think about it, if you are a services business, what the way you get started in your business is you need to find a paying customer. Right? If you have a paying customer, I think you're good to go. Then of course you need people who can fulfill that requirement. Whatever the customer is asking for, of course you need skilled people to build it, to develop it, test it, deploy it, etc., etc. But in a way, to get started, one customer is enough. Right? Because that customer, as long as my company or my business can satisfy that customer, I'm going to make the money. Right? That's your services mindset. One customer is enough. Of course, to scale, you need more customers. But the way you get started is all you need is a paying customer. On the other hand, when you are building product, that's not enough. Right? It's not enough to just have a paying customer. In fact, you look for problems to solve. Right? And then you seek to validate those problems. So let's say when a company starts creating a new product, just finding a person who wants it is not enough. They actually need to see and find patterns in terms of the problem, right? Is that problem actually common across several customers? Because your intent is not just to satisfy one customer. Your intent is to actually find a problem, validate it. And hopefully if you are going to invest in actually building a product, then the market needs to be large enough, right? So this is your first sort of key difference that I see is instead of starting with a simple, I need at least one paying customer to get started. I actually need to find the problem. I need to validate it. And then of course it needs to be large enough. That means if I'm going to invest in building that product out, and in many cases, I'm not going to get paid first, right? I may get some advance and if you're lucky. But in most cases, product businesses will likely need to fund their business, right? Either through their own money or through external capital or some mechanism thereof. But they will need to start building something or at least create a prototype and get that bought by a customer. But that's not the case for services. So this is where the first difference is what comes first, a problem versus a paying customer. Then I think this is where now it starts getting more interesting. Right? So let's say you, on the services side, you find your paying customer. You actually don't have to worry as much about what to build. Right? You of course need to manage how to build it. That means you need to have the right people, right technology stack, right set of skills, the way you code, etc., etc. All of that you need to figure out as a services company. But the customer will tell you what to do. Right? The customer will have somebody at their end who will either give you ready-made requirements, or you may have a business analyst at your end who will help collect all the requirements, and then you will get the sign-off from the customer, and then you will define some kind of an architecture, a workflow, etc., and then you will start building up the product. But you don't necessarily need to evaluate whether what the customer is saying makes sense. Of course, you get to recommend and make choices around the kind of technology and kind of implementation. But as far as what needs to be done and how the product should behave, or how that implementation should behave, is all dictated by the customer. So in a way, sort of if I had to capture it in a line, it's like customer is always right? So as a services company, you just simply need to make that customer happy. So by and large, you do what they ask you to do. On the other hand, when you are creating a product, you get to decide. So that's both a positive and a negative. You get to decide means you are in control, but it's challenging also because you don't know the answers, right? It's very easy when the customer gives you a clear requirement document or a solution brief, and then you can just base all your choices on that. But in your product, the customers are not already available, right? And also, it's not enough to satisfy one customer. You will need to actually satisfy a pool of customers. So then you start looking at the kind of segment you will sell to, right? To our earlier thing, the market needs to be large enough. You need to satisfy a whole array of customers or a whole segment of customers. So now that this part gets tricky, right? What to build. So while you are in charge as the company or the product leader, what to build, it gets a little trickier in terms of actually figuring out what exactly to build, right? And then typically the approach is you look at what is available in the market, what kind of needs are there in terms of the types of businesses or types of problems you're solving. In 99.99% of the cases, there will be competition, right? That means somebody else will be solving that problem. If somebody else, no other product or services company is solving that problem, the customer themselves may be solving that problem internally, right? So it could be a simply build versus buy competition. Instead of buying from you, they may simply be able to build it internally, probably buy through their internal staff or hiring a system integrator or another IT services company and so on. Which means you need to understand what are the options for solving that problem. And then, of course, for a lot of businesses, I think it's worthwhile to pay attention to what the industry analysts are saying, right? In terms of, what are the trends, what kinds of investments customers are making, where the budgets are shifting, who has the buying power, is it the head of IT, is it the head of marketing, is it head of merchandising, what have you, right? So understanding whom you are satisfying, getting an understanding of the market, all of these things become important. And so it gets a lot more complex, right? It's not as simple as satisfying one customer. Now, I realize that I'm being a little simplistic here because even services business actually look at multiple pieces of it. But, if I want to draw a contrast, this is one key difference, that while if I'm the head of product or I'm the product manager or I'm the founder of a product company, I will get to decide what to build, but it's a lot harder now because I can no longer rely on a single document that the customer provides. I actually need to survey. I need to learn. I need to understand. Probably I need to talk to 10 prospects before I can figure out what it is that I should build. Now, one more area where it's very different is the growth model, right? On the services side, of course, once I land my first customer and serve them, and hopefully I make them a happy customer, they are able to refer me to more, right? Or I can, when I'm trying to earn new business, I will need to talk about my past success. But in a way, my problem of growing the business is very different from growing a product business. In the services business, I need to find more customers, which, as you can see from the slide, is common, right? Whether you are building products or services, the only way to grow is find more customers and make them happy, right? Give them what they need. But on the services side, the scaling becomes more a function of finding more talented people, being able to scale the organization. In a way, because every project requires new staff, the prime way in which most services business scale is by actually growing the organization. So you can, if you go all the way to the likes of TCS and Infosys, I think they have lakhs of people, right? And then, of course, a lot of people here are, in the under 10 million bucket. So you're probably less than 100 people or a couple hundred people. So, but you realize that to grow your business, you need more people, right? Unless you have more people, you can't provide services to more customers. And that's your model of growth, is you need to find more people, build and train that talent, and then, of course, serve more and more customers in order to grow your business. So if I had to put it simply, I would look at it as build once, sell once, right? So every time I find a customer, they have a custom requirement, I create a solution for that custom requirement, and then I make my money. Right? On the other hand, when I'm actually doing a product business, my way of growing is very different. First of all, I don't want to build a product that will sell only to one customer, right? So my basic model is build one, sell to many, which is why I focus on the problem. I focus on the segment instead of focusing just on the customer. And then, of course, once I become successful in that space, my next step is to find more problems to solve, right? So if you look at larger product companies or the way product companies grow, of course, they grow specific product business, and they also start building more products, right? Which are a response to being able to find more problems, often in the same space or adjacent spaces or the same underlying technology, but a completely different industry. I think there are many variations of that. But in general, my model is build once, sell to many, whereas the services model is build once, sell once, right? So even if you think about this, right, the build once, sell once, and the build once, sell to many, you realize that there is a difference in scale, right? If I can build it once and then sell to many, then in all likelihood, if I did a good job of building it, I have a much bigger opportunity to scale, because many a times in order to sell this to 5 more people, I don't necessarily need 50 more people at my end. I might actually be able to serve 5 more customers, maybe with, in some cases, 0 additional people, and in some cases maybe with a much smaller support staff, right? Whereas in services, that's highly unlikely, if not impossible to achieve, which is that for every new customer that I have, typically I need more people. I need a bigger team. I need a team across dev, testing, support, services, DevOps, everything. Right? But hopefully, if I did a good job of building a product, then I don't need to scale it in the same manner. That means I have some advantage of that build one, sell to many. Now, one important difference also in terms of building product versus services is actually who owns the IP. And here IP I have used broadly. It's in general intellectual property, which means who owns the code, who owns the ideas, who owns the know-how, all of it. And then of course, how is that protected, right? So in every services contract, it's typically very clear, right? Everything that is built is actually owned by the customer. That means even the code and the know-how is actually the customer's property. And in case you stop servicing that customer, you will hand over everything back to them, right? So you no longer even get to retain any of it. Of course, you get to keep the skills you learned during the process, but everything that was built, everything that was created, everything that you learned is actually owned by the customer. Whereas in the product business, in fact, that's the asset that you're creating, right? Is the intellectual property. So of course, your most important asset is going to be the people who are building it. But right after that, it's their work product, right? So the creator or the company building the product actually gets to own the IP. And even if they sell it to the customers, they are typically selling it some kind of a license for some kind of a limited license with use. That means if my company is building the product and I sell it to the customer has only the right to use that product for a period, right? And for that, typically I will charge a license and support fee of some kind. But any kind of rights to that will lie with me or my company. And there are a variety of ways in which I can protect this, right? So of course, the basic being, trademarks, which anybody can do, which is just protecting the name of the company, the name of the business. If there is something which I believe that is actually innovative, that means there aren't too many others who are doing it, or is a net new way of doing things or building things, then in all likelihood, I will use some kind of a legal filing, like a patent filing, to protect that, right? So that nobody else can actually replicate or steal in a way what I have created. And then of course, a lot of your documents and actual code itself can be copyright protected. And most of the world, whether it's developing or developed, follow a very similar pattern in terms of how that IP can be protected. Now, why this is important is because if actually over time I create IP which is valuable, then I get to uh, license it, right? That's where the value comes from. So if you look at large businesses that have scaled, they have continuously invested and grown their intellectual property. And they have also achieved differentiation through that. That means the kind of products that they have, nobody else has, or they have something better than others, right? So each of these actually creates opportunity for that, build one, sell to many, right? The better I get at actually creating intellectual property, managing it and licensing it, the more opportunity or upside I have in terms of scaling my business. And the reason I dwell on it is because this is a very important difference. Right? So this difference is not just in mindset. In terms of execution, it's a difference in the kind of contracts you actually sign with your customers. Right? So whereas if you downloaded or ever used any sort of easily downloaded software product like an antivirus product, or if you used any kind of office software, one of the things that you click on, or even in many cases, you update the operating system on your phone, you will get some kind of terms and conditions, right? Which most of us don't read, but at the bottom there is a checkbox which says, hey, I agree to all these terms and conditions. And if you ever actually read through these terms and conditions, you will realize that you're only getting limited use of license, right? That means, whoever is actually giving you that software or app or software product is actually only renting it to you for some limited use. And there are a lot of terms and restrictions on how you can use it, what kind of abuses to be avoided, etc., etc. But you are getting a license for it. Whereas in the case of services, whatever was built for the customer is actually given to the customer, and the customer owns the rights to it. So the way value gets created changes. The way actual contracts need to be written gets changed, and then of course your usage policies, terms and conditions, all of those change. So this has an impact or difference, not just in terms of the mindset, but also in terms of um, how you protect it and what kind of use you share, right? So all of this also becomes important if you are trying to create products or productized services, is actually understanding that you are creating intellectual property and putting in place policies and contracts which actually protect that. So I think we are roughly at the halfway point. I think Ankita, I'll take a pause here and I'll see if there are any questions before we jump into the second half of the presentation.
Sure, Kaustubh. There are a few questions. The first question is by Vivek. He's asking, why is the focus of Indian companies only on services? Why are we not making more software products? Is it the mindset problem?
That's what I tend to believe, or at least that's been my experience, that in a way, if you think about it, in fact, that's some of the next slide, is companies in India, or in general companies based out of India, whether they are services or product, are actually very well positioned to build product, right? Because you have access to people, you have the know-how, you have a history of selling. But lot of times the way the product business itself needs to be approached is very different, right? And in the last few slides, we simply talked about the approach, right? So that's why I thought of it as the mindset, right? And you can see some stark differences between how a services business approaches its customers, the rights to owning the IP, buy one, sell to many versus buy one, sell once. All these models are actually a big difference. And if you try to build products with a services mindset, you are more likely to fail. That's you've seen that with larger businesses, you've seen that with smaller businesses. I can say that from my own experiences as well. So it's a different way to build. It's also a different way to operate a business. And in a way, because the IT services business in India over the years has been so successful, that's the know-how, right? And that's a model a lot easier to replicate. Whereas compared to that, products are far more recent, right? Maybe the last 5 years. So I think that's where the gap lies. One is in the approach. So in a way, you could think of it as mix of skills and mindset. And the second is, not enough practice, right? Not enough record of, track record to actually start building product businesses, not just the tech side, but also actually the sales and marketing side. So hopefully that answers your question.
Sure. Thanks, Costa, for the answer. Rahul has a question. How can a software services individual get into software product company? What skills, mindset, and pushes require to cross that chasm?
Okay. A very good question. In fact, some of the next few slides, I'll first talk about this exact thing. First, from a company perspective, right, is to how you approach building a product. So if you're a services business, how do you approach building products or any kind of templates and accelerators? So we'll talk a little bit about that. But a lot of the approach things are similar, even if you are an individual. That means it's a different skill, right? So how do you learn a new skill? You read, you take classes, and then you try to implement something, right? You get some practice. So that same model applies even for somebody who's working with a services company and wants to work for a product company or actually gain more product skills. One portion is going to be the thinking and the mindset. And the way you can evolve that is by actually learning. And then, of course, getting some practice. Okay. Any other questions, or if they're broader, then we'll take them. Yeah, go ahead.
We have a few more questions. So what do you suggest? Shall we continue with the presentation and then take on with the rest ones? Because I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure. So why don't we go through, because I think some of these questions about how do I transition in a career or how do I transition as a company are actually the focus of discussion in the next few slides. So why don't we go through that, and then we'll come to the next part. Yeah.
Sure,
Ankita, I think we have one more survey question. So since we are at a pause, why don't you put out the third survey question? I think that will be useful as we go into the next conversation.
All right, so I'm launching the third and the last survey question. It is, do you have a product function? Next 4 seconds. So now I'm closing the poll question. 21% says product owners, 42% the same product managers, 0% is for the isn't that the same as project manager, 37% says no.
Okay. So I think we have roughly 60% of the companies, and I think we saw from the earlier survey that a lot of companies are actually product companies. So that's great to see that a lot of the companies actually have a product function, right? Either a product owner or a product manager function, and only a smaller set actually doesn't have one. And we'll see whether that is from services companies alone or a mix. And the reason I asked that question is because, just like we talked about, what's the difference in mindset? Of course, there is a difference in the kind of people and the skill set you need from those people. So one of the things I see, to one of the earlier questions is, why can't we build products, right? So seemingly we have an advantage, not just the IT services function, but India as a country, right? Because here you have access to a large pool of educated engineers, right? And the cost of talent is cheaper, relatively speaking. That means if you compare the cost of hiring an engineer in India versus, let's say, a cost of hiring an engineer in the US or Germany or UK, it's a significant difference. I think over the years that difference has drastically reduced, but there is still a big difference, right? So if you think of it as, hey, you want to build a business, what do you need access to? This is all a people-driven business, so you need access to a pool of talent, hopefully at not such a high cost. And then what's very interesting is there is a lot of experience actually selling to companies or businesses all over the globe, right? If you remember our earlier statistic, Indian IT services business is $180 billion, and bulk of it is export, right? So that means there is already know-how among the people in the country on how to sell to businesses all over the world. Now, just like you have experience selling, you also have experience building and deploying solutions, right? So if you're servicing a customer in the US or UK, it could be in any of their departments or functions. We already talked about the sort of larger export market. So you're used to, servicing customers in different geographies, all over the world. And then also there is a lot of know-how across different industries and domains, right? So there are companies who specialize in software for banking. There are others who specialize in software for retail, and others are servicing pharma. And some of the larger companies are actually servicing companies across the industries, across the globe. And in some cases, there is also capacity to invest. Now, I realize that a lot of the companies, a lot of people attending this webinar actually skewed more towards the smaller size. But many companies who are mid to large size actually have a lot of capacity to invest as well. That means if they decided to create a product or a productized IP business, then they have the opportunity. I think even the smaller companies, there are models or ways in which that can be made to work, even if you are only a couple $1 million business. But these are all the advantages, right? So if you have access to the talent, you know how to sell it all over the world, and just keep in mind, I'm here talking on sort of a macro level, not necessarily an individual company level. But these are some advantages that are available to companies in India. Now, I think earlier there was a question is, okay, why haven't we built, enough products, or why aren't there, enough examples of success, in spite of having actually, these advantages? So one other way to look at it is, okay, do people realize that there is an advantage, right? So if I'm a services business, or if I'm a product business looking to scale, one of the reasons why I actually invest in building intellectual property and or products is because it gives me these advantages, right? On a simple level, I am able to compete better, right? If I have something new and innovative, then I can stand out in the marketplace. That's differentiation, right? If I have something pre-built, which I can promise a faster time to value, faster ROI, then my sales cycle could get shorter, right? And of course, if I'm able to do all the way or some level of build once, sell to many, then I will have higher margins, right? So I don't need 10 new engineers to service every new customer. I may be able to do it just with one, right? If I can do build once, sell to many, which means I enjoy higher margins. And then of course, if you want to think of it as my ability to raise capital or ability to sell my company or divest some portion of it, then of course, a product business will enjoy a much higher valuation typically than a pure play services business. So I think if you think about it, there are the advantages of natively being based here, and this is some of the upside to actually why somebody should consider building IP or products. But at the same time, the model is not either or, right? So you already saw from the survey that several companies are doing a mix, right? So they are doing products and related services at one end, and 25-30% are doing both, and then of course a few are doing pure play services. So there is no, it's not just the extremes, right? So it's not just services or products. There are plenty of options in between, which you're already seeing, I think, being used by both companies large and small, which is to create, some kind of in-between options, right? So some of these options, you can think of it as IP-enabled services, right? So there are companies who build product templates, they may be called accelerators, which allow them to have some pre-built work, which then in turn can be delivered faster, right? Others have created products or platforms. So many of the companies have not necessarily created the classic product, which is like all pre-built, packaged and sold, but many are operating in between. And then of course, with the advent of cloud and software as a service now, not everything needs to be really handed over. You still get to maintain and manage it from your end, which means the bar is even lower on what kind of products or product enabled services you can provide. Now, of course, what exactly should be built will depend on the organization, their access to product expertise, capacity to invest, etc. But there are a lot of in-between models, and I think you will see that a lot of mid-size and large-size companies have explored these possibilities in terms of creating some kind of accelerators or templates. I think this next slide, I think in a way refers to both sort of in part to the company model or the problem of how do I transition from one to the other, right? And it need not be a transition. It could simply be getting better at doing something. So if your company or you are actually already building products or some kind of IP enabled services, there is still an opportunity to actually get better at it, right? And if you think about all the discussion that we had on the mindset, essentially this is a new way of building, right? So you're not just listening to a customer, you're actually surveying the market, surveying the competition before you build it. So definitely it's a new way of building. And that new way of building actually impacts all parts of it, right? It's the kind of technology you build, the kind of design function you have, the way you understand the market, the way you understand the competition. And of course, just like if you want to, if you were to build a bridge and you have no know-how for building the bridge, what do? You hire somebody who has built bridges before. So I think in a way the same applies, right? If your company does not have the know-how or does not have that level of know-how, then you seek to get that expertise. But especially the next point, which is the CXO buy-in, I think this is very relevant to services companies making forays into product or IP enabled services, is there has to be executive buy-in. And this I say because having worked and talked with many of these companies who are attempting to build product or such services, without having the highest level buy-in, I have not seen this work very well, because it has a whole series of repercussions in terms of how the structure is enabled, what kind of capacity is enabled, investment, etc. So this is more like a experiential learning in terms of saying that any effort like this should have buy-in from the executive level. And then of course the model is to experiment and learn, right? If you don't have if you haven't built products before, then you try your hand at it, learn from it, then over time you can build a team, and then of course over time you also get to build a revenue. If you have already been building products, then the same applies, right? First time you create a product, you learn from your mistakes, you learn from others who are doing it better, you get help from those who have done it, and then you iterate, right? That's the same kind of model to develop a new mindset or learn the process of actually doing it better. So why now, right? So in a way, a lot of these things have been around a long time, but I see it as an opportunity which is even more relevant today because of what's happening around us. So one way to look at the current crisis is that it has led to a lot of changes, both in the way economies are operating, the way people are operating, and the behavior. And that behavior change is actually seen across both people and businesses. So one way to look at it is that all these changes create opportunities, right? That means there are a lot of new problems, right? You've already seen a lot of startups, a lot of companies actually change their way of operating, provide new products and new services. So a lot of new problems means a lot of new opportunity. A lot of new products and solutions can be built and sold. So whether you are a product business or whether you're a services business, this is actually creating opportunities across the board. Of course, they need to be found, they need to be validated, and then solutions should be created. But there are opportunities across the board. So in a way, I feel that at this point in time, it's a lot more relevant to actually evaluate either creating new products or starting to build products if you haven't built yet. So that's kind of my take on it. Okay. I have one last slide, which is, I think in a way we had some of that answered through the last survey. So we have a lot of companies with product functions. But this is kind of my learnings from having seen and worked with services companies. I think we spent a lot of time talking about the mindset. So hopefully all of you got at least some hang of it. That essentially building products is a very different way of operating than building a services business. And certainly it's worthwhile to actually invest in a product management function. Right? So that function, whether you, can think of it as product manager or product owner function, there are some differences. But by and large, there has to be a function, a set of people, or at least a person who's actually looking after that, is to figure out what to create, why to create, surveying the market, surveying the competition, etc. And then, of course, understanding what customers are looking for. I think we spent a little bit of time talking about the need to protect IP contractually as well as through systems. And then, of course, over time, I think if you want this to grow successfully, you need dedicated teams, right? So it's difficult to have someone operating as an engineer on a services project and simultaneously trying to build a product, because it's a very different way of approaching the problem. So I would say these are some of my learnings over time in the last 4 years in terms of things to avoid if you are a services company transitioning to build products. So I think with that, that's the kind of end of my presentation. Thank you all for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or my email. And happy to hear your thoughts on the presentation or any questions you may have. But I will take a pause here and I'll hand over back to you, Ankita. Please let me know if there are any questions and I'll go through those.
Sure, Kaustav. So it is 3:24 right now. So we have few minutes, 6 minutes. So let's take up few questions, or else for the unanswered one, as Kaustav mentioned, that you can reach out to him over to his LinkedIn ID, and then he would be able to answer most of them. So the next question is, Kaustav, what is the best way to learn about the new product opportunity?
Okay. So I'm gathering that this is more like a individual level question as to how to get a job in a product function. Is that what it sounds like, Ankita?
This question is by Mr. Gupta. Can you elaborate your question a bit? In the meantime, let's move on to the next question, Kaustav. When would India stop selling resources/hours, instead charge based on outcomes value to customer business, so that innovation and automation grow?
I think hopefully the very good question. When does India change? I think hopefully the change starts now. But jokes apart, in a way, this trend has been happening. Right? So you're already seeing over the last 4 or 5 years, fairly large size product businesses built out of India, and the change is definitely underway. I think the way to look at it is, while services business is easy going, so that means it's easy to build a services business. People will build services business. When that comes under pressure, people will shift. Right? That means they will start looking at product business. That's one way why things will shift over the next few years. The other reason why things will shift over the next few years is because now there are some examples of success. Right? So now we are seeing some product businesses built out of India. So you will start seeing that happen as well. I think the third part is that actually today, the amount of IT products and services sold to businesses in India is still very small. Right? In most cases, even if a company builds products out of India, 95 to 99% of the business in that segment is actually outside of India. In most software segments, the Indian software market for buying IT products is under 5%, and in many categories it's under 1%. Right? So that's also another reason why, unless companies figure out how to build here and sell everywhere else for their know-how and their IP, it will take time. So I would see that these are the different factors why it's taking time, but I think the change has started. Yeah. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Kaustav, for this answer. The next question is, how could one do discovery of market problems in a large organization where it doesn't have immediate access to users and clients?
Very good question. In fact, the problem of not having immediate access applies to a lot of businesses based out of India, because you are based here and bulk of your market is outside of India, right? So there are sort of two ways to look at it. One is learning through proxies, right? That means you can do research around how businesses are operating. You can whichever industry you are targeting or whichever kind of product or function you are targeting, there will be material available about what others are doing, what others products and services are available in that segment. And then of course you will get to also learn about what analysts are saying, right? So these are some of the things. But what is most interesting is to actually figure out how to read between the lines, right? So that means you are seeing how businesses are shifting or how they're operating. If you can start making educated guesses about what that will mean, right? So let's say, for instance, one of the most obvious things that is happening in the world today is that people are stuck at home, right? That means if they need to shop, they shop online, right? Now, if they shop online, that's a clear trend that everybody's seeing. But what's the answer to that, right? How do you enable people to shop better online? This is a problem. There are multiple ways to solve this. So what I would say is, part of the research can be based on what you are learning from the market, from the competition, what's happening in the world. And the other part comes from synthesizing and analyzing that to come up with possible ideas. And then of course, those ideas around possible solutions or products need to be validated. Right? That means, will somebody buy it? Does that make sense? So you need to close the loop by actually getting back in touch with people who could potentially be using your product or service.
Thanks, Kaustav. So this question will be the last one. I'm just telling you, this question is by Divya. She's asking, I think products involve upfront investment and sales later. Services pay upfront. That's a big difference. How can that be bridged?
Okay, very good question. In fact, we touched upon that lightly, though not with as much clarity earlier. Is that your services business starts as soon as you have a paying customer, but in products you may or may not have a paying customer, right? I think you are lucky, or if you've done a lot of homework, you might actually find a customer willing to pay you, and that's typically true for very innovative products. But bulk of the products will require some kind of upfront investment before you can actually start selling it to people. So there are sort of 2 or 3 different strategies which can be employed for this. One is the validation, right? That means you validate the product and the problem both without actually building the product, right? So if I say that, hey, ABC has this problem, one way to validate that is to check actually with 10 such ABCs that this problem is common. That means I know that this problem is not unique to a customer, but it's actually across the spaces. And that gives me some sense that, hey, this is a large enough problem segment to approach. Of course, if there is already competition solving that problem, then that's another validation point as well. And then in terms of the actual building, you can build prototypes, right, to validate. That means for many of the software products, you can get some level of customer buying by showcasing them a prototype. That means I don't necessarily build the complete product. I build some portion of the product, or I build a slice of the product and then show that. And that allows me to create proof in the customer's mind that, hey, this is something that can work, or they are likely to buy. And that's another way to validate. So market validation plus prototyping plus maybe in the very early stages doing some kind of proof of concept are all mechanisms to sort of minimize the investment. Because even if you consider raising capital from outside, you will need some level of validation and proof before you can raise the capital. So these are some of the strategies. I think the more specific answer depends on your specific situation in terms of size, access to capital, etc. But there are ways in which you can sort of minimize the amount of capital you need by using some of these strategies to validate both the market segment as well as what kind of product you should. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Kaustav, for this great session, taking up a webinar on this very significant topic for the Indian product ecosystem to scale and flourish, to have the dominant position in the product world, how mindset plays a critical role in transition from product services to products. So yeah, thank you so much, Costa, for your time and efforts. It was a wonderful session, and I'm sure, like me, everyone out here, they must have enjoyed and learned something new. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Ankita. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yeah, and for the everyone, for the attendees, to attend more sessions and registrations, please visit nasscom.in/events. I'll meet all of you on 24th of June with another interesting session. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Costa.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.